Today, we will discuss topics such as the Antardasha, results of Saturn's exalted and own signs in the Shani Mahadasha, verse 1 of chapter 57 of Parashara Horashastra. When we really dive into this specific Mahadasha, and specifically the very first Antardasha, we are looking at an incredibly concentrated, potent period of karmic delivery. Over the course of this explainer, we're going to explore the precise text, the complex calculations, the varying effects based on planetary dignities, and the specific mitigation measures prescribed by the great sage Parashara for this exact planetary alignment. Let's get right into it.
So, looking closely at the original Sanskrit of chapter 57, specifically verses 1 through 3, the text outlines the very specific conditions for highly auspicious results. It literally states, Mula Trikona Swakcheva Tuliam Uchagogapi Va. Now, what that translates to is Saturn being placed in its Mula Trikona sign, its own sign, or in Libra, which is its sign of exaltation, or even deep exaltation. The verse then continues by specifying placement in a Kendra, which is an angular house, or a Trikona, a trine house from the ascendant, or acting as a Yogacaraka planet. You see, the parsing of these verses is incredibly literal and highly conditional. The sage is basically setting up a mathematical and geometric equation for us here. If Saturn is elevated in these specific dignities and specific houses, a very distinct set of fragmented, literal outcomes will manifest in a person's life during this subperiod. And that brings us directly to the simple English translation of these highly dignified placements. The text explicitly guarantees immense practical and material success. According to Parashara, if Saturn meets these high dignities, the native experiences, and I quote, acquisition of a kingdom. Now, in our modern context, we can easily translate that to the attainment of a high position in government or leadership. It also promises happiness from wife and children, acquisition of conveyances, like elephants, which, we would understand today as luxury vehicles, and gain of clothes, attainment of the position of a commander of the army by the beneficence of the king. Plus, it explicitly mentions the acquisition of cattle, villages, and land. The really crucial takeaway here is that Saturn, a planet that is so often feared for its delays and hardships, actually becomes the ultimate bestower of immense worldly power, familial happiness, and tangible wealth when it's dignified in its own Antardasha. To build a deeper understanding of this, we really have to contrast the literal astrological meaning of these practical life events with Saturn's philosophical meaning. Astrologically speaking, this text is a predictive manual. When Saturn is exalted or in its own sign during this period, it manifests as concrete, real-world events, buying a house, gaining a major promotion, achieving a high corporate position. You might literally become a CEO or a director. But philosophically, Saturn is the great karmic teacher. It represents discipline, structure, hard work, and the ultimate undeniable truth of time. When Saturn is well placed, that kingdom or that corporate position you acquire isn't just a random stroke of luck. Not at all. It is the structural culmination of past karmic effort. The material rewards listed in the text are simply the physical manifestation of spiritual and karmic alignment. Saturn rewards responsibility with actual authority. To truly grasp how this works, we have to understand how Saturn's placement in specific houses triggers these profound successes. The text mentions Kendras and Trikonas. The Kendras, that's the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th houses, represent the core pillars of a person's life. We're talking self, home, partnerships, and career. The Trikonas, the 1st, 5th, and 9th houses, well, those are the houses of Dharma, fortune, and divine grace. When Saturn, a planet of duty and karma, is positioned in these powerful angular or trinal houses, and is simultaneously in its own sign of Capricorn or Aquarius, or exalted in Libra, its energy is perfectly channeled. If it acts as a Yogacaraka, which means a planet that simultaneously rules a Kendra and a Trikona, like it does for Taurus and Libra ascendants, it literally becomes a supreme benefic. In these specific scenarios, the strict discipline of Saturn directly feeds the fortune and power of these houses. That's what triggers the attainment of high government or corporate positions and the massive accumulation of wealth. However, the narrative drastically shifts as we examine verse 4. The sage explicitly details the Antardasha of Saturn when it is poorly placed. The Sanskrit gives a very stark warning. Randre vavyayabhave wa niche papa yutik shite. This translates directly to Saturn being placed in the 8th or 12th house, or debilitated, which happens in Aries, or associated with malefics by conjunction or aspect. Under these specific negative conditions, the literal meaning points to severe afflictions. We're talking fear or danger from the king or government, getting inflicted with injuries with some weapon, bleeding, gulms or tumors, and dysentery, along with danger from thieves, exile, and mental agony. Philosophically, instead of structure and reward, this alignment brings structural breakdown. When Saturn is afflicted in this way, it demands the immediate payment of past negative karmas. The practical significance of this is immense. Rather than building an empire, the native experiences extreme physical vulnerability, conflict with authority figures, and a really profound destabilization of their life structures during this precise subperiod.
Moving on to our next section, dynamics of planetary natures. Having established the baseline of Saturn's own subperiod, we now need to analyze how the natural natures of other planets uniquely interact with Saturn's overarching Mahadasha.
Okay, so the matrix of planetary relationships during Saturn's Mahadasha is incredibly intricate. Let's break it down. Shani Dev, or Saturn itself, as we've just seen, yields mixed results that are highly dependent on its dignity. Dev Guru Jupiter is naturally a great benefic, usually bringing reverence and success, but if poorly placed, it causes profound loss. Mercury, interestingly, though a friend to Saturn, can paradoxically cause loss of intelligence and deep anxiety in its smaller subperiods if it's afflicted. Venus, another great friend, often brings the total fulfillment of ambitions and immense success in ventures. K2, however, acting as a fiery, headless malefic, brings imprisonment, agony, and loss of luster when its subperiod activates within Saturn's overarching timeline. The resulting blessings or afflictions you see here are a direct product of these natural planetary natures interacting with Saturn's very strict framework. Deepening our analysis on Devguru Jupiter, as found in the text's translation for verses 74 and 75, we actually find a fascinating caveat. Normally, as we know, Jupiter brings opulence, glory, and religious mindedness. But the text clearly states that if Jupiter is in its sign of debilitation, associated with malefics, or placed in the 6th, 8th, or 12th from the ascendant, its natural beneficence is entirely corrupted. The results shift drastically to, and this is a direct translation, death of near relations, loss of wealth, antagonism with government officials, failure in projects, and journeys to foreign lands. So a poorly placed Jupiter in Saturn Dasa shifts completely from being a wise, benevolent teacher to a source of severe financial and social antagonism.
Now, drilling down even further into the Prayantardashas, which are the sub-subperiods within the Antardasha, reveals an incredibly precise fragmentation of results, detailed specifically in Chapter 61. During the Saturn-Mercury Prayantar, the text explicitly dictates loss of intelligence, quarrels, dangers, anxiety about availability of food, and loss of wealth. Conversely, during the Saturn-Venus Prayantar, the text promises fulfillment of ambitions, well-being in the family, success in ventures, and gains therefrom. Meanwhile, the Saturn K2 period warns of imprisonment in the camp of the enemy, loss of luster, hunger, anxiety, and agony. It's amazing how these brief windows of time profoundly color the overarching Saturnian period, directly dictating whether the native experiences ambition fulfillment or sudden intelligence loss and anxiety. Next up, diagram methods and calculations. To understand exactly when these periods occur, we must turn to the highly mathematical diagrammatic methods detailed by Parashara to calculate precise planetary years.
Examining the primary calculation method on page 421 of the text, we find the core formula for the basic planetary contribution of years. This entirely hinges on finding the exact longitudinal distance between a planet's point of deep exaltation and its actual placement in the birth chart. The text provides a really concrete example using Saturn. Saturn's maximum contribution is 20 years. In the provided example, Saturn is exactly 223.1613 degrees away from its deep exaltation point of Libra 20 degrees. Breaking down this complex math into a digestible procedure really just requires 3 steps. First, you calculate d, which is the distance in degrees between the planet's deep exaltation and its actual position. Second, you identify f, the full number of years that planet can grant, which, as we noted for Saturn, is 20 years. Finally, if d is greater than 180 degrees, the formula is this. Subtract d from 360, multiply that by f, and divide the whole thing by 360. So, in the text's example, 360 minus 223.1613 gives us the adjusted distance, which is then multiplied by 20 and divided by 360. That yields a basic contribution of exactly 12.3979 years for Saturn in that specific chart. This level of precision is absolutely necessary to construct the dasa diagrams and accurately map the timing of life events. But the calculation doesn't stop there. These basic contributions must undergo specific reductions, known as Harana, to reflect planetary weakness. First is Ashtangata Harana. If a planet is combust, meaning it is too close to the sun, its granted lifespan is reduced by half. Interestingly, though, Parashar explicitly states there are exceptions for Venus and Saturn. They literally do not suffer this reduction when in combustion. Second is Satru Ketra Harana. If a planet is in an enemy sign, its basic years are reduced by 1/3. But again, a fascinating exception exists here. Retrograde planets, referred to as Vakrachara in the text, do not incur this liability, even if they are placed in an inimical sign. These meticulous rules ensure the calculated periods perfectly reflect the celestial realities.
And finally, afflictions and mitigation measures. We now transition to a vital component of the text, the practical mitigation measures prescribed to counteract these severe karmic afflictions. According to the original Sanskrit instructions found on page 645, there are very clear directions for mitigating these evils. For instance, when dealing with the physical distress associated with an afflicted Saturn placed in the 2nd, 7th, or 8th house, the text explicitly instructs Tad doshapriharatam mrityunjaya japam charet. This translates directly to performing the Mrityunjaya japa to obtain relief from the evil effects. It also suggests giving in charity a black cow or female buffalo. You see, the text essentially views these remedies as active technological interventions into the karmic framework.
So, here are the specific mitigation measures based on Parashar's instructions. The Mahamrityunjaya japa is heavily prescribed for physical dangers and health crises during Saturn's period. Giving a black cow or female buffalo in charity is specifically linked to appeasing Saturn's heavier, more challenging energies. Furthermore, for afflictions related to Venus in these subperiods, the performance of Durgapatha is recommended, and the recitation of the Shiva Sahasranam japa is prescribed broadly to restore karmic balance and mitigate mental agony. These aren't just symbolic gestures. They are prescribed, calculated methods to structurally alter the energetic flow of the dasa period.
In summary, the Antardasha of Saturn within its own Mahadasha, as detailed in verse 1 and verse 4 of chapter 57, is a highly sensitive, incredibly potent karmic period. Depending on its dignity, it can manifest as unparalleled material success and the acquisition of a literal kingdom, or it can bring severe structural breakdown and physical distress. Understanding the precise calculations, the influence of other planets like Jupiter and Venus, and the prescribed mitigations is absolutely essential for navigating this profound period of discipline and ultimate truth. On behalf of the Vedmata AI family, if you found this presentation informative, please share our video as widely as possible so that the authentic knowledge of Indian Vedic texts can be spread to the masses. Let us all participate in this yagya of knowledge.